Hey, it's Ben from the Strength Factory, and in this episode of Understanding the Numbers, I'm going to be talking to you about power training, what it is, how to use it, as well as running through a few key bits of jargon and metrics that are going to let you get the maximum results by using power. The first thing to do then when we start talking about power is actually to understand what it is. What are we talking about? You probably already know that power is measured in watts. You hear people talking about how many watts they can put out and things like that. But actually watts are made up of two things. So it's force times velocity. The force is how hard you're pushing on the pedals, and velocity is how quickly you're turning the pedals. And the higher the force and the higher velocity, the higher greater your power. Now, I'm just going to show you really quickly a little demonstration of how those two things interact and two different ways that you can ride at 200 watts. I'm going to give you an example now on the watt bike. I'm on level 1, which is the easiest resistance, and I'm going to spin the pedals until I'm riding at about 200 watts here. And obviously this is a low amount of force, but it's going to be a quicker cadence, so more velocity to achieve that 200 watts. So the cadence there was in the high 90s roughly, and I ended up spinning at 200 watts. Now I can also achieve 200 watts like this. I turn that resistance up to 10, so it's maximum resistance on the bike. So I'm going to be putting more force into the pedals, and I'm going to pedal slower to achieve that same wattage. There, I was pedaling in the high 60s for cadence, so about 68 RPM, and again I hit 200 watts. So you can see there the relationship between force, how hard I press, and velocity, how quick I spin, and how that produces power on the bike. You should now understand the relationship between force and velocity, i.e. how hard you're pressing the pedals and how quickly you're spinning, and how that affects your power. Now, your power obviously affects how quickly you can ride, especially sprints and uphill and things like that. And it's also then relative to your body weight. It's all very well having a really high power output, but if you're 110 kilos or something really heavy, then you may actually be slower than somebody with less power who weighs less than you. And so that comes to the first metric, which is called watts per kilo. So at any duration, so whether it's 5 seconds, 30 seconds, 5 minutes, an hour, you can figure out what your maximum power output is for that period of time, and then you divide that by your body weight. And so what you get there is how many watts you can put out per kilo of body weight. And that is ultimately the performance metric that determines how fast you are, in particular when it comes to overcoming gravity and climbing. On the flat, for literally flat ground for a maximum effort sprint, it's a bit less important because the main factors are wind resistance and not gravity. But for anything where we're climbing the bike, watts per kilo is absolutely king, and that is the measurement that then governs how quick you are. So obviously, how do we improve your climbing speed, your watts per kilo? You can lose weight, you can improve your power, or ideally you want to do a bit of both. Okay, now losing weight is great unless you're losing muscle mass, and then your power goes down as well, and then you're back where you started, you're just a bit lighter and a bit weaker. So it's obviously a little bit more nuanced and a little more tricky than that. What we need to do then with power, and one of the real benefits of power, is that you can profile your abilities as a rider, and so this is called power profiling. So you'd use something like a watt bike, or you could use a power meter on a on your actual bike out on the trails or on the road, and you're going to run through a series of tests. And these tests are then going to give you your power profile. So for instance, you might do a 6-second sprint, a 30-second max effort, a 3-minute max effort, a 20-minute effort, and so on. And at each of those efforts, you get your maximum average power for that duration, and then we can plot them on a graph where we've got the the max power, those high wattage ones on the left, and then it's going to drop suddenly and curve off, as the power drops and the duration increases. So power on the vertical axis and duration on the horizontal axis. Different riders will naturally have different power profiles. So some people are naturally explosive and they're going to be on the left. Other people are naturally endurance athletes and it's going to be a lot lower on the left, but it's going to tail off less and stay higher as you go to the right and the duration increases. And as well as the genetics that go into that, it's also all about your chosen event. If you're racing BMX or downhill, then you want it to be really high on the left, you don't need it to be high on the right. Whereas if you're racing cross-country marathon, then actually you don't need that really big sprint on the left of the grass. You need your power profile to be higher and stronger on the right of the graph over those more prolonged durations. So what are the key numbers then that we generally look at when we're working with power? What do we want to measure? Well, as I mentioned a minute ago, it does depend on the event. If you're doing marathons, I don't really care about your sprint, and if you're doing downhill, then it doesn't really matter what power you can hold for 2 hours, So that's the first thing to consider. But in general, the data that we want to gather are those peak powers at the lower, 5-6 seconds, and then the average power over certain durations of time. So 6-second sprint, 30 seconds, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and so on, whatever it is that you choose to do. And then the key metric that comes up again, which we're then going to use to set our zones, is your functional threshold power. And this is effectively the same as doing your functional threshold heart rate test, except we're measuring the power to really measure your performance. So once you conduct that test, that then gives you the power that you should be able to maintain for an absolute max effort time trial over about 50 minutes to 1 hour, okay, which is incredibly tough to do. Luckily, the test doesn't require you to ride for that long. Once you've then got that functional threshold power, you can then calculate your training zones based off of that. Now that you've got your power zones set up, and potentially you've watched my heart rate video or you've used heart rate in the past, and you've got an understanding that there's 2 metrics you can use for training. They overlap, but actually sometimes they'll give you slightly different zones and things like that, which can lead to a lot of confusion. So I just want to talk to you about using heart rate and power together. So the first thing I'll say is that heart rate is very useful because it responds to how you are on the day. So if you're having a bad day where you're a bit fatigued, you might not hit your power numbers, but you might be riding at the correct heart rate. And that way, using heart rate for your training can be beneficial because it doesn't make you push too hard and then put yourself even deeper in a hole. Similarly, power is really useful for shorter duration intervals because it's instantaneous. You press on the pedals and the power displays on the monitor. Whereas if I'm doing a 30-second interval with heart rate, you can't really do it because your heart rate is always lagging behind your effort. Power is instant, heart rate always has a delay when you change your level of intensity. The other drawback of power training is that it's a bit more complicated and it's expensive. And generally, most people aren't going to be able to have a power meter on a road bike, a mountain bike, and like an indoor trainer. It's a lot of money. Whereas one heart rate strap can cover you no matter what activity you're doing. A really effective way to use heart rate and power together is actually for progress checking. So if you were to do a ramp test where every minute you ride 20 watts harder, so maybe you start off at 180 watts, and then a minute later you're at 200 watts, and a minute later you're at 220, and so on. And for each of those minutes you get your average power and you also get your average heart rate. You write that down, you record that in a spreadsheet or somewhere or on a training app, and then you'd go away, you do a period of training, and then you come back and you retest that, and you find that for each power output, your heart rate is now lower. That is then showing that you're more efficient. Your heart rate is your input and your power is your output. So we want maximum output for minimum input. And so if you can achieve the same power for less heart rate, then you're getting fitter. And so it's really useful to use the two things together to help measure your progress without having to do absolute maximal testing, which is really demanding physically and mentally. So hopefully, you've taken that on board. It's kind of simple, kind of complicated, and where people really tend to go wrong is when they look at their heart rate and their power zones and they don't quite add up. And you'll be riding along and people have a total mind melt because they're in like zone 3 for power but zone 2 for heart rate, and it just blows their mind. Okay, just stick with one. Okay, what am I training with? I'm training with power or I'm training with heart rate. And then if you're training with power, then heart rate is just like an extra reference point to help monitor your progress. Okay, don't just confuse yourself. Okay, I've seen it happen so many times, and I'll be honest, it used to confuse me when I started this game as well. So remember, the key factor that determines how quickly you ride your bike is your watts per kilo. Okay, not just your outright watts. So to get faster, especially at climbing, more watts, less kilos, happy days. You're going to be smoking all your mates and getting Strava King of the Mountains, except you're not going to be able to see it because you have to pay to subscribe now. So I hope that was all nice and clear. If you've got any questions, make sure you leave them in the comments, and I'll be back soon with more factory knowledge and understanding the numbers.